This is Scott from AJ Aircraft. Welcome to video number 3 of the 105 laser. In this video we're going to tackle things like the rudder pull installation, radio setup, engine mounting, and much more. So let's get started. Today we're going to address the rudder servo installation. We're using a double servo pull setup, and here you can see the contents of the package. When you open your kit, you'll see the rudder contents package already pre-marked and everything. And what you'll see here is obviously you'll have your six links. You'll have your pull connector, your pull cable connectors. These are your cable crimps, your 440 bolts to bolt down to the servo arms. You'll need, when you're doing the 4-inch, or when you're doing the double servo installation, you'll need the two 4-inch servo arms so that these can run in tandem, and the two turnbuckles. So once you get all this stuff laid out, the next step is to go through and set up your servos and your radio. So that's what we're going to do right now. I won't go into this in overly too much detail, but the first thing you're going to want to do prior to starting this installation of your rudder servos is make sure you get in your radio. Make sure your radio is set for 2 servo setup on the rudder. Should be in your systems menu depending on which radio you have. Find out what channels they are assigned to. So for instance, in the DX18, my first rudder servo goes to the rudder, and then my second one goes to aux3. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get your servo arms set and make sure that your servo arms are 90 degrees to the body. You want to really take some time, make sure you get your sub trims right, make sure these are perfect 90 degrees to the body. Also, you're going to want to make sure that they are both traveling in the correct direction. So once you get that set up, you get these 90 degrees, you get your sub trim set, or your sub trim menu trimmed out. You can go ahead, and I just like to temporarily lock these arms down just in case I need to take them off at a later date. But you want to make sure you lock tight your servo arms, your pinch bolts, all of that stuff. The other thing, obviously, the grommets and the inserts need to be installed on this. And what we're going to do now that we have that set up is we're going to go ahead and start to put them in the airframe. The first thing we're going to want to do is fit your servos in there, and obviously you can see here that I've pre-drilled the holes. I've just taken my little Dremel tool and pre-drilled the holes, and then go through, and I like to just sort of coat those holes, coat the wood with thin CA, so when so it sort of binds, makes the wood a little bites a little better when you put your servo screws in there. So just like to put a little thin CA on there, hit that with a little accelerator, and then we'll go back through and mount. We'll go back through, use our servo mounting screws, and get the servos mounted in, and you'll see that here just in a second. Okay, as you can see, we're here just finishing locking down the servos. Remember to, like I've done in previous sections of the video, I like to put a little thin CA on the servo screws as I'm installing them. This helps really hold them in place and sort of combats any type of vibration, and it keeps the wood nice and tight when you're screwing the screws down in them. So there you have it. You see the servos are mounted. The servo arms have already been programmed in the radio and set to 90 degrees. And now we're going to go ahead and plug the radio in, make sure that we get the servos moving in the right direction, and with the servos on, we're going to measure the distance from the center of this hole and the center of this hole, in the center of this hole, and the center of this hole, to get our links set perfect. And then we'll go ahead and test that prior to doing the pull cables. So I've gone ahead and put my receiver in with the battery and got the servos are mounted. Obviously this isn't how we're routing the wires at this point. We're just trying to get this hooked up properly. So, but something to keep in mind is when you put your servo arms on at 90 degrees and then you trim your servos to be perfect at 90 degrees, you have to make sure that you plug them in to the correct channel. Otherwise your sub trims will be opposite of each other. So if you sub trim this one in the rudder port and this one in the aux 3 port, and then you would switch those, the centers that you would, the 90 degree centers that you had got set would be slightly off again. So you want to make sure, number one, that you get that right and you get them plugged in. So you can see here I put a little piece of red tape on the servo that goes into the rudder port, so I know that I can plug that one back into that at all the time. So we'll go ahead and plug the battery in and we'll get the servos set. And then what I like to do is we're going to go ahead and make the turnbuckle, put the turnbuckle together. You can see the turnbuckle with the links that mount directly on the servos. So the order of installation when you're bolting these to the servo will be the washer, a washer on top of the link, a washer on top of the link, and then this bolts to the servo arm. So, but before we get to that, now we have to make sure that we get this set. I like to do these one at a time for the double setup. So the first thing I like to do is measure. I like to go in and use my dial calipers, make sure they're zeroed out there, and measure. Now, keep in mind the servos are on, they're both moving in the right direction, and I like to use and measure from the center of those two bolts. So the center to the center, and then go ahead and use that measurement to set your link. And then once your link's set, you can go ahead and just install it just temporarily to make sure that it's set correctly. I like to install these one at a time, and the reason you do it at one at a time is to make sure you have the pressure of those two servos working together, that you have that perfectly in sync. Because what you don't want is this link to be a little bit too long fighting against the other servo. So just install that, and you can sort of listen to the servos, and then you just take your 5/32 wrench, and then you can just make little tiny adjustments. And those little tiny adjustments mean a lot. So there you go. Then you get the servos are quiet now, and you got that side correct. And then you're going to go and repeat that same thing on this side. So you're going to go ahead, measure that, set your link up, bolt this link, take this link off, bolt this link on, do the same exact thing. Make sure that it's perfect. Servos aren't making any noise. Then install both the links, and then you're ready to install your links that are going to go to your pull cables, and you'll see that in just a minute. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and hook up the pull cable links, but there's a couple things I want to talk about first prior to that. So we've gone ahead and programmed the servos into our radio. We've made sure that the links are the correct size, there's no binding or noise or anything going on in the servos. But the one thing I want to talk about that's very important is this servo arm is from center of this hole to center of this hole is 3 3/4. This exactly matches the control horn in the back on the rudder. which from center of the hole to center of the other hole is 3 3/4. It's very important that you don't adjust this outside of the 3 3/4, making it longer or making it shorter to try to either gain more torque or more throw. The reason I say that is because this would, at 3 3/4 here and 3 3/4 on the control horn, it's going to give you a 1-to-1 pull ratio, and it's very important that when you're pulling the rudder to the one side that the non-pulling cable does not slack. And it'll be very difficult if you go outside of that 3 3/4 inches to say 4 inches to gain more throw, which isn't necessary. You'll possibly slack one side of the cable, and you don't want that to happen. You want both of those cables to be tight. The other thing is you want to make sure that the left rudder cable is hooked to the right side of the servo, and the right rudder cable is hooked to the left side of the servo. So those wires in there are crossing over, and that they have a nice good tension to them. You don't want them pulling or binding on the servo, but you want them to have a nice sort of a piano wire type tension to them. So the other thing you want to do is make sure that your ATVs are set to 125 or higher for the fullest resolution that you can get out of the servos, and then you'll mechanically adjust from there. So what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about hooking up. You'll see in your rudder kit, you'll see you have 4 of these, and you'll have 2 of these turnbuckles, or 2 of these links. Remember that this link is the link that hooks to the servo. The link that hooks to the control horn is a little different. We covered that in another video, but I just wanted to make sure that that's the control horn link. It doesn't have that big flange on the end of it. So you want to go ahead and thread this into the control link, and then I like to, you'll also see this little crimper. This crimp, I don't know if you can see it in the video, this crimp has a little flange on the end of it. So that flange faces the link. So I like to put that on the wire like this. And then you have the other one. I put 2 of them on. Not everyone does that, but I like good safety. Then you're going to pull this through. You'll pull this, feed that through that link, and then I like to make a big loop. Oops. I like to make a big loop here like this. And then, so it looks like that. And then you're going to just loop this around again. Oops, I don't really have enough slack there to get it around like I want it. Alright, so you have that, and then you're gonna loop this around again and push it back through that turnbuckle, so it looks like that. So you loop that back around, and then that makes for a nice slidable link. You can see how it slides there. You can move it back out, so you can make it long, or you can pull it in tight. Then once you have this pulled tight and you have your adjustments done, so hook up both of these. So you're going to hook up both sides of this, pull your cables out of the fuselage, and set those adjustments. And then I like to go back around and crimp the cables. But you can crimp these cables up here first. So what you'll do is you'll get this nice and pulled in like that, and then you'll pull that. Then you'll pull that link, or you'll pull that nice and tight. Pull that down nice and tight. And then crimp this, and you're going to crimp that, which is going to crimp down on the wire, and then you pull your other one up on there, and I like to put 2 crimps on each wire. So and then drip, you know, some thin CA on it, and then cover the whole thing up with heat shrink. That'll make a nice cosmetic link. And then you do the same thing with 4 servos. So you're doing 4 links. You're going to do this link, and then both the control horn links back on the rudder. So I like to do the ones in here first. Pull the cables tight out there, and then make your adjustments out there to get your rudder nice and straight. Now the other thing you can do is put a little piece of tape on your rudder to make sure you're holding it at the you know, the 0 mark, and then you make your adjustments out there, get it close, and then obviously you have this much adjustment here to go back and tension your cables. So as you're turning that, you're gonna move that in and tension your cables a little bit for fine adjustment. So you're gonna repeat that. You're gonna repeat this on 4 different links, get it all set up, get it zeroed out, and then make sure that you have same travel on both sides. Make sure that your cables are crossed in the middle, and that when you're full deflecting on either way of the servo, you're not slacking one of those cables. And then that's that 3 3/4 center hole to center hole 1-to-1 pull ratio that you don't really want to mess with. So that's your rudder installation and rudder servo installation, and we'll move to the next part. Alright, a real quick note before we move to the engine installation is when you actually install the elevator halves onto the fuselage, you'll see here the 2 carbon tubes, but also when you're utilizing your extension, and keep in mind the extension that goes from the front of this back here to the front is, I think you can use a 48 or 52 inch. I'm currently using a 52 inch servo extension. Might be a tiny bit long, but if you use a 52, it gives you some adjustability to where you want to place your receiver. But one of the little notes I wanted to show you is I think it's extremely important to make sure that you have a clip on here to hold these 2 servo extension and servo wire together. You want to make sure that those don't ever pull apart on you. Obviously I know that's a basic function, but I just wanted to show you that. The other thing that you're going to want to think about is, now that you have your rudder installed and everything, the cables hooked up, you want to make sure that your travel adjustment with the elevator at full, you want to make sure that you're getting that max travel out of your rudder, so it's coming, you know, right up against your elevator there when you're setting your travel. Also on the rudder, another little side note is when you set this wire down in here for the hinge, the removable hinge pin, I like to just use a little screw right there, as you can see, and that screws that keeps that wire from moving or popping up or anything like that. So it helps then, because in some cases people were putting a collar down here, like a wheel collar down on the piece that hangs out, and that can get a little difficult sometimes. So just a little screw up there. It's a cosmetic thing. If you don't like it, you can do it your own way as well, but that's just a couple side notes for the elevator installation when you're actually putting them on the plane. We're on to installing the engine. So a couple things that you're going to want to do pre getting this ready. Obviously, you've seen the detailed contents of the hardware pack and what is included in it, and you see the two different size standoffs. So a couple things that I just want to talk about when it comes to standoffs. The very first thing I think is important to do is take your canopy and literally split the halves and bolt this half right onto the plane and measure from the firewall to your outside where your spinner would go. So what you're looking for is about a 2 to a 3/16 gap from your spinner back plate to the front here of your cowling. So with your cowl on, the measurement should be in most planes 7 inches and 3/16. So that's with your cowl on. So you want to add 2 to 3/16 to that, and you want to add 2 to 3/16 to that measurement, which is going to put you at about 7 1/4. So now, a couple things. You wonder why there's two standoffs here, two different size standoffs. The small standoffs, if you measure the engine from the back of the standoff to the back of the spinner, the small standoff will give you 7 inches. So obviously, needing 7 1/4 with the cowl on, that's not enough. The big standoff gives you 7 1/4. The 7 1/4 that you need. Now, the difference is, there's a couple differences. Here with the big standoff, doesn't leave you any room to put a bigger fender washer or something on the back side of the standoff. So when you're sinking it into the plywood, it'll help spread out the surface area. So you might, if you're going to do that, you might be interested in using the smaller standoff and using some washers to get your spacing right, as far as giving you some more surface area to mount to the firewall. If you don't feel that that's needed and you just want to use just the standard standoff, this is the larger one, is the one you're going to want to go with. That's a 7 1/4 inch standoff. So now what we're going to do, now that we sort of know those numbers, we're going to pull the DA100 mounting or pre-mount pre-drilled template out. This also covers the DA120 as well as the DA100, the 4-bolt pattern, and we're going to go ahead and get this lined up. And I will show you exactly how to do that. We'll pre-drill the firewall, and then we'll move to temporarily mounting the motor. Okay, so here's the firewall. Obviously, just a side note real quick, you're going to want to make sure that all these bolts are nice and tight. So get yourself a little wrench and your Allen wrench and go through and tighten up all these bolts. There's a aluminum angle iron in there supporting the inside of the motor box on both sides that are making that nice and rigid. So make sure those are tight. Second, you'll see the center line and the offset, and you'll also see that matches on the template. So for instance, if you get the template upside down, you'll end up drilling the holes incorrect. So in upside down, these two lines don't match up. So you want to make sure that you have the DA100 lettering right side up, and that these lines are correctly lined up. So you just want to sort of fit that template in there, get it in there nice, make sure that you can see that They got the holes that go around these washers here. You can see that fits in there pretty good. And then once you have that set, I like to just take a little clamp right down through and just clamp it so it's sort of down flush to the firewall, and then we'll get out the drill and drill our holes. So we'll do that just next. Okay, we got the template ready. We're going to go ahead and drill our holes. You want to make sure that you, like I said just a minute ago, make sure the template's clamped down just so it doesn't move around on you or do anything funny. And then just line up your holes there and just make sure you go slow. Use a little bit higher speed on your drill. Go slow. That way when you break through the firewall, you don't splinter out the back. Not that it's a big deal if you do, but you know, because you'll have a big fender washer back in the back. So, and then go ahead and repeat that. Drill all 4 holes, and then we'll be ready to temporarily mount up the engine. So we have all 4 holes drilled, and we're going to go ahead and just sort of We're going to go ahead and dry fit the engine, but before we do that, I want to talk about the order of assembly for the bolts. So obviously the bolts are supplied in your hardware package. You're going to use the lock washer and the small flat washer. That's going to be on the outside of the engine. So then we'll go through the standoff, and on the back side you're going to use the fender washer or the large washer, a lock nut, and then the nylock nut. So that's how that's sort of the order of assembly there for that. Now we're going to go ahead and fit. I'm going to go ahead and fit the engine on to the firewall, and we're just going to use the hardware supplied. So I will be right back when we get all the hardware installed and ready to mount. Okay, as you can see, we got the motor mounted up just temporarily. Now the goal is to sort of pre-fit the cowling and start to see what kind of spinner gap you're going to have. So go ahead and grab your spinner back plate, and we'll fit the spinner back plate on the motor, and then we'll slide the bottom half of the cowling on, and we'll have a good idea of if we're in the ballpark on our spinner gap. So let me get this off here. Now the spinner back plate, the spinner is a 5-inch spinner, and as you already know, it was supplied, the carbon fiber spinner was supplied in your kit, so you can just use that unless you're going to use something on your own. But I'm going to go ahead and sort of slide that on there. I'm just going to hold it on there for now. I'm just really rough fitting sort of that we have that correct. So the other thing you want to look for is the spinner located in the right position on the hole. So that's the other thing you sort of want to look at. But it looks like we got good spinner gap there, and actually we got good alignment. So we're pretty close with the supplied standoffs. So now the goal is going to be to go in, lock down the motor, use your Loctite to secure all the bolts, use your nylock nut, all of that stuff, and then we'll move to mounting the ignition and some of the other facets of the engine, such as the throttle servo and whatnot.
Alright, mounting your ignition is fairly easy. Just find a good place on the motor box for it. Make sure your spark plug wires are routed in such a way that they're not laying on anything hot or touching the cowl or anything like that, like you see here. The other key thing that you want to make sure you do is using a servo clip to hold your servo, your two ends together to make sure they don't come apart in flight and shut your motor off. Also, you're going to want to use an ignition, like a spark switch, something that can shut your ignition off via your radio, and that plug here, you'll use that to go directly to your battery or to a spark switch like you see here, using a spark switch and making sure that that's installed properly. You can read through the different manuals depending on what kind of switch you like to use, but I use this one right here. So that's pretty much it. Here you'll see an ignition mount that has some O-rings in it that stops vibration, and it's velcroed down. So all that is really all you need to do to mount your ignition.